What is a podcast anyway? It used to be a question asked by folks who really had no idea what we were talking about, but now it is becoming a legal issue. So join this episode of Legit Podcast Pro as I explore how it's a legal issue and I ask for your feedback as we try to define this elusive creature called a podcast. Welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro, the show that takes you behind the scenes of podcasting to explore the legal, the ethical, and the business aspects that shape this ever-growing industry. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and today we're going to wrestle with a surprisingly sticky question that's been around as long as the medium itself. It's the question of how to define podcast. What even is a podcast? Well, today's topic is a little different. And it's come up in my world recently as a real issue, a legal issue. So I thought I'd talk about it a bit and ask you, my viewers and listeners, for your thoughts and your feedback. What is a podcast? Well, back when the medium was just being born, this was a question asked by people who really didn't know what the heck you were talking about when you said podcast. And mostly we'd say something about internet radio on demand or something along those lines. And we mainly focused on audio because that's what podcasts were. But that's all changed in recent years, hasn't it? Nowadays, folks have not having a sense of what a podcast is. Well, that really isn't the kind of problem we have very often. Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past 20 years, it's hard to believe it's a 20-year-old medium now, but unless you've been hiding under a rock for 20 years, you have probably got a pretty good sense of what a podcast is. But can you articulate that in words in a way that distinguishes it from other kinds of recorded content? What is it that sets a podcast apart from other forms of media? Video is a growing force in podcasting. It's not just audio anymore. So definitions really do start to matter. Well, you might be asking, well, why does it even matter? And I'm going to lay out a scenario for you. I was talking to a fellow attorney the other day, and he was telling me about a situation that I took as a little bit of a cautionary tale because I'm drafting and negotiating contracts in the podcast space quite a lot. And he's dealing with a situation where his client is a performer. I'm not going to be very specific for a number of reasons. But this performer entered into a contract with a podcast company for an exclusive podcast contract is what it was called, a podcast contract. Then this performer goes on to do what he does, perform, right? And he goes and he does a live performance, but it's being recorded. So did they just violate the podcast contract? Exclusive, right? Okay. What if they record a TV special or do a radio show? What if he's a guest on a radio show or a guest or a host of a radio show, right? This is how these people make their livings, after all. And so he's got this podcast contract that calls for him to do a certain number of episodes per season or per year or whatever, but it's exclusive. He's not allowed to do other podcasts. Well, now you get to question, what is a podcast? So what if he records an album? What if he does a movie? Doesn't matter if it's a documentary or a short film or a feature film. This is the issue. We need to have precise language in our contracts, because if you don't have precise language, you have these ambiguities, you get people pointing fingers. And that's exactly what's happening with this particular performer who the podcast company is saying, you breached your contract with us because you went and recorded that other thing. You did that other show. You're being asked to be on a television series. And in fact, that's what's really at stake, is this person is being invited to star in a TV show. Well, is that a podcast? No, it's a television show, right? Well, how do you know? What is different about a video podcast from a television show? Maybe it's a talk show on television, right? Talk show on TV, talk show on radio. Look at Joe Rogan. What's he doing? It's a talk show, right? But he's doing video. There you are, right? I mean, this is the issue. So the problem is that in the law, the four corners of the contract is what governs. And if you don't have a clear definition of things in your contract, it can become a real problem. There's a principle called the parole evidence rule. It's a common law rule in common law of the English and American law that governs the kinds of evidence that parties in a contract dispute can bring in when they're trying to determine the specific terms of a contract. It prohibits parties from bringing in extrinsic, outside evidence from a prior or contemporaneous agreement that would modify or contradict the terms or clauses in the current contract, unless there's evidence of fraud or duress or a mutual mistake. So is that what's going on in a scenario like this? The rule also says the parties can't bring in um, uh, outside evidence if they've reduced their agreement to writing. They can't do their oral discussions. They can't refer to other stuff unless there's fraud or those kinds of things. So can the court look to what a customary outside definition is if it's not identified in the contract? Ultimately, you throw yourself on the mercy of the court, the judge, the jury, and so on if you can't get the evidence in some other way. So once all the parties have signed that written agreement, it can't be changed by oral agreement. It can't be changed by the court or the jury, except to sort of interpret that language. And, you don't necessarily want to trust those folks to define it for you. So there is now currently, this is now outside the legal arena, but I just happened to hear recently about a move to create a glossary of terms in the podcasting and recorded audio space. The guys over at Sounds Profitable, Brian Barletta and Tom Webster, are involved with that, among others, I'm sure. And they're working on something. And I reached out to them and I said, I know you're working on this issue and mainly you're focused on terminology in the advertising space. What is an ad? What's a spot? What those kind of things. And I said, but we really got to do the foundational work of defining podcast. And I came up with an idea or two and I threw it into an email. I said, I sort of focused on the way the medium is distributed, that it's a media content that is intended for distribution through a syndication and an RSS feed. And I thought that was pretty good. But then Brian emailed me the other day and he pointed out that's not quite right because Spotify doesn't distribute via RSS. Apple's paid podcasts don't use RSS. In fact, they require you to upload the file directly to Apple, and then they have their own protocol for doing it. So I turned to Google, and I searched out this question, and I'm going to get my browser up on the screen and read a couple things to you. So stand by here while I do that. And okay, so I'm looking at my Google, and I just wrote in, what is a podcast? And they gave me Wikipedia. Wikipedia says a podcast is a program made available in digital format for download over the internet. Well, we've got a lot of streaming. Is that a download? I mean, yes, it's progressive download. We can get into that whole debate. For example, an episodic series of digital audio files. Well, what about video that a user can download to a personal device to listen to at a time of their choosing? Okay, on demand. Podcasting are primarily an audio media, with some programs offering a supplemental video component. Tell that to YouTube, who has entered the podcasting space in their big way, and they don't use an RSS feed right now either. Streaming applications and podcasting services provide a convenient and integrated way to manage personal consumption queue across many podcast sources and playback devices. And there are podcast search engines and so on. So that's the Wikipedia definition. Over here at, who's this? Podcast Insights, Ross Wynn addressed this question back in January. He says, how would you describe a podcast to someone who has never heard of them before? That was a question that was recently asked in a Facebook group, and he looked at answers varying a bit. Some focused on free or on demand or niche or talk radio, and his favorite answer seems to have been, it's all of your favorite blogs, shows, and topics. Some you didn't even know you'd enjoy, wrapped up in a huge hub of recordings like Apple Podcasts and others that you can explore, download, and listen to on your own time, in the car, at work, at home, working out, anywhere. If you can Google it, there's probably a podcast about it. That is all absolutely true, but it doesn't help us defining what's not a podcast. A digital audio file, here's a dictionary definition he cites. A digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So there's that syndication component of it. I went over to Riverside's definition, and they say, let's see, a podcast is the streaming age's answer to radio. And they also refer to a dictionary definition of a podcast as a digital audio file you can download or listen to over the internet. Well, I submit to you nowadays, if you watch a movie via Netflix, you are downloading a media file via the internet. And he gets into the history, and shout out to Adam Curry and Dave Weiner, who coded the iPodder, a program that would let people download internet radio broadcasts to their iPods. Adam is someone I will actually ask this question of. But it's this form of entertainment. They ask, are they audio or video? And yes, it started out as a completely audio medium, but with the growing popularity, many podcasters have embraced video podcasting as a way to stand out and reach an even bigger audience. It's very popular. Users are averaging watching 19 hours per week of online videos back in 2022. That's about half, 50% more, I should say, half again more than in 2018, so just a few years later. So creators who want a show to grow are appealing to looking to video as a way of doing that. Here is Castos' definition: a digital audio program consisting of a series of audio episodes that you can download or stream from the internet. Now, I should point out, Castos is a podcast media hosting company. They focus on audio because that's their business model. Video files are big, and they may not be so interested in hosting and distributing audio on the same financial cost basis as those. So, depends on who you ask on how they define it. Is it audio or video, and so on. Here's the podcast host's definition from Colin. What is a podcast? Simply put, an audio program just like talk radio, but you subscribe to it on your smartphone and listen to it whenever you like. Well, I ask you this: can you subscribe to YouTube on your smartphone? Can you subscribe to Netflix or Paramount Plus or any other streaming service on your smartphone? The answer is yes, you can. And nowadays with streaming, you can consume it all. So it can stream or it can be downloaded. All of these sort of open questions really need to be brought into the equation here. I want to know from you, how do you articulate what's a podcast? I'd love it if you would comment on this episode or wherever you're seeing or hearing it, or message me on social. You can usually find me. G Firemark is my handle. Let me know what you think a podcast is and isn't, and what's important in the definition as we start to move forward toward locking down definitions for this. And then in a coming show, I will recap some of your answers. So thank you for listening. That's going to be it for this episode. Whatever a podcast is, keep on making them. Oh, I forgot to do the ad. This episode is brought to you by Easy Legal Forms and Templates for Podcasters. If you're a legit podcast pro, you want to protect your intellectual property and ensure that content is used appropriately. Easy Legal Forms and Templates for Podcasters can help. Our form store at podcastlawforms.com provides a variety of legal forms and templates specifically for podcasters, including host and co-host agreements, DMCA takedown notices, release forms, and much more. With these easy downloadable templates, you can customize the forms you need in just minutes. Plus, our affordable bundle and a la carte pricing makes it easy to get the protection you need without breaking the bank. Visit podcastlawforms.com today. Easy, legal, affordable forms and templates for podcasters. Podcastlawforms.com. All right. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Just one of the commenters on live right now says, I think a podcast is an audio recording across the internet. Video should be called video casting because it involves being on video. That's Kenny. That's your opinion. Yes. Thank you, Kenny Briggs, for your point of view. And regards to my friend Bob, who's watching as well. Love to see you here, bud. And I think that's going to do it. I'm going to just, again, invite you to give me your feedback and comments and let me know what you think a podcast is. And until next week, I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I'm out.